And so, Lord, in our world where we are constantly being distracted by all that is false, all that is fake, Jehovah God, and yet it's taking its claim as its most beautiful, Lord, I ask, Lord, that you would draw us back to yourself. You draw us back to your true beauty, a beauty from where we can be transformed, a beauty from where we can be shaped and reshaped and rewired, Jehovah God. Lord, in this world where there are all these competing forces screaming for our attention, declaring them to be the eight, Jehovah God, may you remind us in our deepest parts that you are everything, Jehovah God. And that you too have a claim, that you have a kingdom that is inaugurated, that is running here and now. A kingdom where the last are the first. A kingdom where those are mourning are being comforted. A kingdom where in our persecution is still being lifted up, Jehovah Father. A kingdom where faith and hope and love transcend everything, Jehovah Father. So as a people longing for kingdom, a people created for kingdoms, Jehovah God, as a people who are constantly being dragged from one kingdom to the next, to the next, to the next, Lord, would you help us stay grounded in your kingdom? Would you help us stay grounded in your kingdom? Would you help us stay next to you long enough to see your hand, your kingship at work, both in our lives, in our neighbors, in the world around us? Lord, as we are gathered here today, we want to believe for the things that we cannot do by ourselves. Maybe many of us are here and we are at the end of our rope in all these different arenas, Jehovah Father. Whatever that might be, may we be courageous enough to just release ourselves to you and to see you move, Lord. You who does the impossible, would you do that in our lives, Jehovah Father? Lord, maybe for most of us, all we need is just to sense your presence. Our lives don't feel like you are a part of them, Lord. So I'm just praying that you would make your presence known in a way that is unmistakable, Jehovah Father. They'll walk out of this place knowing that we are not amongst people, but we are also amongst a God, Jehovah Father. So do you be with us, Jehovah God. In your name we pray, trust, and believe. Amen and amen. You may have your seats as we get these things. Good morning. If we haven't met or somehow you forgot my name over the past week, I'm still Nashua Ruguru, and I have the privilege of leading this incredible community. If you haven't come to our new home, I'm glad you are here. You should have been here last week so that you could also have prayed and the weather would have been as nice as now, you know. So a lot of people are thinking whether they want to come to church after what they experienced last week. We will keep praying for them. But this is our second Sunday in this space, and it's just so exciting because this is going to be the place where God is going to do incredibly powerful things. As you can see, we are still a long way from completion. And not only are we a long way from completion, we are even a long way from being together enough so that our voice is unified enough to shape something in this space, you know? So if it was one of those churches for shouting, I would have made a shout until, but we won't do that because I have a bigger goal. My hope is that you get to invite your neighbors, and there will be so many of us. So Liz won't have to tell us to project our voices or anything. We'll just be telling people, keep quiet, our neighbors are still sleeping, you know? In the meantime, here we are with a big space. We even have a tent inside. So should you at any one point in time feel the need to sleep, we have a tent right there, you know. Should you need to change your child, there's a space in there that you can change the child. But yeah, it's exciting. And we keep going on with the journey, and Anne will be giving us an update of where we are a little bit later in the service. But for now, we still... I say this is still day 2 of our welcome home. So I guess from next Sunday, we will start to wrestle with what it is that we feel the Lord is calling us to this year. But today is still a day of like settling in, figuring out where things are, and I think we are almost there. But as we try to do that, we are staying with the children of Israelites. And if you remember last Sunday, we talked about, and Kayla, I'm like looking for the thing. Is it like that far? We're going to get it. Anyway, but last week we explored this idea of Israelites at Mount Sinai. They're like out there. Last Sunday. I'm like confused because of technical hitches, you know. But anyway, last week we explored the idea of Israelites just after the big miracle where they crossed the Red Sea, and finally they are on the other side of that whole slavery experience. Like now they can confidently say, we are free because we have not only left the people, we have not only crossed the Red Sea, we have even watched our enemies, the guys who are enslaving us, be swallowed up by the water. So this is as free as they can get. And essentially, they get the journey going. The big claim you can imagine for them that they are holding up to at this point is that God has promised not only to rescue them from slavery, but also to rescue them and to take them to a promised land. This land that is full of milk and honey. This land is like something to behold. So literally, in between the slavery, the thing that is keeping them going is also like they have been rescued from slavery. It's also the idea of we have some place that we are going. And I think they are focused on that. So after the Red Sea, they get going. And at some point, they come to this Mount Sinai. Now, by the time they are coming to this Mount Sinai, they have a bunch of things have happened in the process. Like a lot of things have happened, as it were, you know. They have, of course, sung the song of praise that we said last week. They have grappled against Moses and God about water, about food, about pretty much everything at this particular point. They have even been attacked. Remember, these are guys who were just the other day slaves. And now as they are journeying, they have been attacked by some group of people called the Amalekites. And thank God they have been victorious. I mean, it's unbelievable. These guys who have never had an army, who have never had anything, they have seen God move and they have victored. They have conquered these Amalekites people. So, I mean, you can imagine they are on a certain high. Like, they are like, this is going well. Very, very well. They have literally been visibly experiencing the tangible hand of God along this. So like, you can imagine these guys, 2 million of them. Now imagine it's a normal day. The manna has been delivered in the morning as usual. I don't know, they have eaten to their food. They're waiting for the next meal. They are walking to the next wherever corner they need to navigate. All they know is we are heading to our promised land. This Canaan place. And so they are excited. You can imagine slaves talking amongst themselves and they are thinking, how is this place going to be? Remember, these guys, they have been in slavery, not just them, but their parents and their parents' parents. So literally, in their generation, no one has had a space to call their own per se. So they are thinking what do people do with the land when it's theirs? You know, like, do you build a small house? Do you build a big house? And I think amongst themselves, they are competing amongst what they are going to do in this new promised land. It's very, very crystal clear. We have been saved from slavery, and we've seen God do so much to get us free from slavery. Even here in the desert, we have seen God do so much to navigate us through the tensions of this wilderness, things that meet our needs within this wilderness. And the big awaited promise is the land is coming. We who are former slaves, now we get to be occupants of that place. And I don't know fully what it looks like, but because the only thing they have seen of a nation is someone that colonizes others, someone who enslaves others, I'm sure they are thinking, who do you think we should go first for? You know, we just go fight them, conquer them, make their people slaves. You know, it's like the way it's supposed to be. And so they come to Mount Sinai. And all this is like we're imagining this conversation, the kind of conversation that is going on amongst them. And now at Mount Sinai, something dramatic happens. A lot of dramatic things will happen within this mountain. But for today, I just want you to stay with me at just the entrance of this story. It leads led to us, but we're just going to pick it up from verse 3 to 6, basically. But bottom line is, they are finally at the bottom of Mount Sinai. For them, it should just be another camping spot, a place where we're just camping before we go to the next phase. But something happens in this mountain. Moses somehow goes up to God. This is where he goes to meet God. And the Lord calls him from the mountain. I mean, this is a big deal. And then he says, that you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the Israelites, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. These are the words that you are to say. These are the words that you are to speak to the Israelites. And again, it's a big deal. Like God is saying something more here. But I don't want you to lose the track of what I started by saying, that for these guys, up to this point, all they know is they have been saved from slavery, and the next big thing is their promised land. Everything else is just in transition. We don't care a lot of these things. But here comes God. And God says some even more dramatic things. Now, you don't hear this in a dramatic way, but imagine a generation after generation of slaves, and now God shows up and tells them, you people, you're going to be a covenant people and a treasured possession. Imagine how you hear that after, if all your life, if all your parents' life, if all your grandparents' life, if all they knew was to be subservient to some other person who was abusing them, who could do whatever they wanted, who could wake up in the morning and decide that your children don't deserve to live, so they're going to be killed every day, who decides that you're going to have your work doubled. I mean, you hear this like, you are going to be my treasured possession. You're going to be a covenant people. I don't just want you to go through this whole thing. I actually want you guys to become a people in relationship with me. And they're like, all right, that one, we don't even have a concept of that. We have never seen that modeled. All we know is to cry out to God to save us from slavery and to grab to Moses when we get a chance. But it's okay. There's something called a covenant. All right, we are in. But also it gets better, because he says that, and you guys are going to be a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. And I think we read the Bible and we gather. I mean, I'm convinced 100%. These guys did not hear the priestly part and the holy part. They just heard, we are going to be a kingdom and a nation. From slavery to being a kingdom. I mean, that's as close as you get to literally being some political nobody and someone you just picked out of nowhere in your place in a position of power. Kingdom is a big deal. Now we are not just slaves. Now we're just not a tribe, or we're not just a gathered people. We're not just a people in transition. We are a kingdom. That means we get a king, doesn't it? Oh my God, we are going to be like the Egyptians. And we're going to be a nation. Something that, again, like I said last Sunday, that not even their great-grandparents could imagine. Something that not even their parents could imagine. Now it's being declared to be true for them. You're going to be a kingdom and you're going to be a nation. This is a big, big deal. Before we go to the big deal of it, it's only a big deal because of our natural human tendency. It's only a big deal, this statement that God is making, and even you see the way they respond, everything God says we are in, without really interacting and engaging what actually this looks like and what this means to them. Because I think by and large, like I've been piggybacking on this idea, for the Israelites, the thing they knew is we cried out to God. God responded, and not only did he respond, he gave us a promise of a better future in the land flowing with milk and honey. So essentially, I think, the thing I've just said is a big deal to the degree that because by and large, we are a people who know how to cry out to God for salvation without wanting anything more from him or anything to do with him. And for Israel, I mean, this is a big deal. And like they hear it, and I'm sure they're like quite excited. But this is not something that they were anticipating. It's something that they were looking for. They're looking to be a covenant people and a treasured possession. As good as that is, I think they had ideas of being a kingdom and a nation, but they thought they could organize that. They could obviously learn how to be a kingdom and a nation from their neighbors. But this story of priestly kingdom, this whole of holy nation, that's not their cup of tea per se. And it's not a cup of tea because even though they were slaves, they had become a people very good at crying out to God. I mean, they cried out to God until God had to intervene. So that one they know, like we need salvation here. But as a lot of us, we want salvation without anything more from God or to do with God. I don't know about you. I can almost tell you how intensely I pray when there's a very clear thing that I need either to be saved from or to be saved for. There's something that is a big deal. Someone is unwell in my world. I pray like crazy. I know how to cry out to God. I wake up early. I will fast. I'll go on my knees. I will intercede to the best of my ability. As soon as God answers our prayer, of course, it's a part where I say thank you. But that is not a kind of thank you that actually sustains a relationship. It's a thank you that is like, okay, I did my part, really. I'm not that terrible. I'm not one of the 10 lepers. I mean, I actually came back to say, thank you, Lord. But if you were to watch my life, and you were to watch how I live, between the times when I'm contending, when I'm crying out for something, and then how I live my life after the something is met, you will come to attest that I actually am one of these people. I don't love. I just find myself crying out for salvation without wanting anything to do with God by and large, or without anything more from God or anything to do with Him. I mean, in a very real sense, if you're to really get me, and a lot of us, to be honest, and you're to ask us who God is, I'm sure we would say a lot of different things. But if you're to watch how then we interact with that God, you'll be shocked to realize that God is some holy, sacred witch doctor of some version. Now, of course, you hear that and you're like, oh, don't even say that. But this is what I mean. I don't know how many of you have visited some. I would love some experience. I haven't visited. But those people, from what I have seen on TV, it's like they work hard and you go because you don't go because you want to. You go because you have come to the end of yourself, the end of your rope. You have come to the full stop of everything you know how to do. And so you go to this person who promises, if you just do A, B, C, D, trust you me, we'll take care of this problem once and for all. And from the TV stories, it looks like it works. I mean, as a matter of fact, you don't even need to think about which doctor. You just need to think of some famous Nigerian televangelist person who promises the same thing. Just come to my country, live in my house. Everything you're going through, I will sort it out. And you go. And as it turns out, it works out. Of course, until you die and we do a documentary and we figure out, yeah. But the point I'm trying to make is, we're not different than those people. Most of the times we come to God. So like when we were looking for the land for this place, I prayed personally. Especially when they would tell me that our time is done at Bethsaida Park. I kid you not, I would take walks and I can almost tell you where I was when I just could sense God say something is coming. And I'm like, but where is it? And you know what happens as soon as God provides a space like this? Either I go to rest. I mean, after I say thank you, don't misquote me. But very quickly, either I go to the next big thing. Okay, God, thank you for land. Now, sasa itajengwa na nani? I mean, because I look at you, and I see the decisions that the accounting team makes as regard to how much you give. And I'm like, oh God, these people cannot do it. Now you need to bring help. And so I cry out. And Mudhoni just woke up for Aki, just eat something. Oh! At which point I feel very righteous. I'm like, wow, I'm contending for this. And then finally we get to a place. And it's not beyond us to just be the kinds of people who either our faith life is fueled either by the next bigger thing that we are looking from God, the next big thing that we are hoping for, waiting for, crying for, and all the time. It's simply rooted in this philosophical reality. We want a God who can save us without interfering with our lives, without wanting more from us, without needing anything more from us. Just save us. I think to some degree, I think the Israelites were those kinds of people. There are people who are like, let's just rescue us from this whole slavery, sustain us through the wilderness. Please settle us into the land of flowing with milk and honey, and please just leave us. Just to watch it too. We can take it up from here. It's almost a big human divine battle. Forever, God reaching out, God rescuing us, and then as soon as we are rescued, we are like, all right, I think now we can. Now here we got it, But not so for Israelites. For them, they get to be told you're going to be a treasured possession. You're going to be a covenant people, a priestly kingdom and a holy nation, a kingdom and a nation. And the thing you to hear is that although they didn't imagine that God would have more for them, that when God revealed them more he had for them, it's actually incredibly better than they could have imagined or asked. They couldn't have imagined themselves being a covenant people with this God that they cried out to, and who responded by sending some guy called Moses. I don't think they could have imagined being in an intimate, loving relationship with this God. I don't think they could have imagined themselves being a people that God claims for himself, right? Of all the people in the nation, of all that I have created, you guys are going to be my treasured possession. They couldn't have imagined that for themselves. Not only are they going to be a kingdom and a nation, they are going to actually be a priestly one. They are going to be a holy one. And I want to reframe that right here, because when I say that God has more for us, most of the time within church circles, it amounts to just more exhausting work. It just means that we have more program. It means that we have more spaces to engage, more spaces to take up your time. It means that we're asking you to do more. But the more I want you to hear when God reveals his idea of more, it's something that actually roots us much more intimately with him, that actually allows us to do so much more than we could ever have asked or imagined. The Israelites, these slaves, moved from within like a couple of months from just simply being a bunch of slave people, almost giving up on Moses, almost giving up because they are facing the Red Sea, to finally the creator of heaven and earth saying, you are a covenant people, you be a treasured people, a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. So you can almost see where I'm going with this. But I think that deep down, God has more for this community. I mean, this is great. Everything that he has done is incredible, which is why we paused last week at least as a way of giving thanks. I mean, it's a big deal that we are here, and we could retell the stories, and we'll tell the stories. By now, you're bored by the stories. But I've been also asking God, so what is the more we have here? Like once we are rescued, as it were, from our situation, what then comes and emerges for us to engage and to give ourselves to? And I've been praying and I've been thinking about that. And God has been leading me to a sentence that we had come up with back in the day during COVID eras, when we were sitting in the house and praying and asking God, like, what kind of a church would you want us to give birth to? And one of the sentences we came with, and I was even checking with Modern, how did we end up with such language? Right? Like literally, that's like there. We had this idea that we wanted a church that would be reimagined for a complex world. I mean, it sounded really dramatic and nice in our two house people. But then the more we engage with it as pastors, we realize this is actually quite dramatic. A church reimagined. No. We don't reimagine church. For a complex world, not for a complex world like that. Our world cannot be that complex. And so somewhere along the line, we haven't necessarily highlighted this as much, but I felt like we were kept being drawn back into this over and over and over. And I want just to spend a few minutes to talk about this idea of a church reimagined for a complex world and where you fit in. But this idea of a complex world. Now, I don't need to convince anyone sitting in this sanctuary today that the world is complex. It just is. And I could just stop there. But my sister-in-law had a chance to come for a party, like Christmas season where all the parties are on. So my sister-in-law had a chance to come for a party in Nairobi. So she left over there with her kids. They came to Nairobi. And obviously, right? I mean, like we all act like being in Sharks is like really cool and awesome and it's restful. And it is. But also the thing about it is like by day 3, you guys have covered all the stories you had, so that you're hunting for a fresh story, So when she says she's coming to town, you're like, hey, there's an opportunity for story. At least my family, they are like story people. So she comes back whenever she comes back. And you can imagine all of us at different times. My mother is like, hey, how was it? Not like it was a safe trip. God watched us over the road. We're like, hey, tupatie mushene, from the party. And we're all very keenly interested, So eventually it's our turn, me and Modoli, to say, hey, how was the party? By this time she has told everyone. Like this is like, I'm sure she's exhausted telling the story. Did I not tell you guys that? No. Hey, tell us. And of all the amazing stories she had about the food in the party and the music and the DJ and all those different cool things, she had this one particular encounter that really shaped a bit of her. And so she bumps into this other friend of whoever the party host is. I mean, just a friend as a friend, as it were. They get to talking out because my sister is very interested and curious. And so she gets to learn that this girl is literally on the frontier of what we could call secularism in Kenya. All right, let's call it the frontier of the frontier of secular liberation, as we would frame it. Like, just those three words are all crazy there. But it's seen and perceived within their world as some form of liberation, you know? So she's like responsible for putting together all sorts of amazing parties, apparently, where people show up to explore all their sexual experiences. Now, I know some of you are interested. Hizi parties zinakuanga wapi? You'd have to meet a friend. But the bigger point is, I mean, this shocked my sister. I mean, she's like a nice missionary, remember? And she loves Jesus. And she just almost, a lady is lifted up to the other corner of Nairobi. You know, the one that most of us are not even aware of. And even if you're aware of, you never admit it in church. All those other corners that all of you guys treat, you know. And so this one is one, like, she finally meets an influencer in that kingdom of sexual revolution, whatever, and freedom. And like, she has stories. And like, this girl is convinced that this is the best gift she could give to the world. Expand the space of Kenyan exploration of sexuality, especially as it pertains to women. Most of it just sounded a lot of horrific, painful, suffering experiences. But hey, it's liberation according to them. But anyway, the thing about this story that got to my sister was that this lady who is now on the frontier of this experimentation of the world, she was a key church participant. And she has jumped the hoops. She has done all the work, basically. She's even a daily committed member of some amazing organization that has given itself to the work of helping people study and understand scriptures. And they do an incredible job. But this girl was a part of the whole process. And then somewhere along the way, she had some challenging theological conversation, that is, as she frames it, and the people didn't respond with kindness and with acceptance and wrestling, entering into the ring with her. They just simplified the whole thing. They said, you must be overthinking things, as it were. And before you know it, they planted this seed of, maybe this whole thing is just sort of a scam. And that is okay. You can come to the conclusion that church is a scam. Except for the fact that nowadays, when you decide that church is a scam, there's almost always another community waiting to receive you, waiting to embrace you, waiting to help you live into your wildest imagination. And if you happen to be someone gifted with a little bit of money and a little bit of adventurous mind, it's amazing what you can do. And so almost this friend of hers has shifted from just being a committed Jesus follower within a Christian community of faith and everything, all the way to being an evangelist for that which is most broken and vile amongst us. But if you're to meet her, and also challenge you to be an evangelist to her, I almost wonder where you would start. Most likely she knows the scriptures better than you do. Did I not say she has done all the hoops within the church community? She has attended incredible Bible studies. And so now, all of a sudden, we are faced with this world, not just like how crazy the world is in terms of the war and in terms of all those different things, but primarily because of even how we as human beings are complex and how we engage this world. But for a church, we keep refusing to reimagine ourselves. We keep, as Modoni told us some time back, we keep clinging to our Sunday school spirituality. It was important and very essential and very central for us at that stage in time. But now, as life has gotten more and more complex, yes, the gospel doesn't change. It doesn't become more complex. It just becomes a lot more nuanced. So my sister, after interacting with this person, just came home and said, if these are your congregant, you guys, I'm going to be praying for you. Notice the key word there. If these are your congregants. So I assume a number of you might know even the friend I'm talking about. Therefore, we were with them yesterday. Should tell you what we did. So that's how I mean, like, and I say the word is complex. So let's talk about a little bit about this idea of a reimagined church. A church reimagined for the complex world, but it's primarily reimagined for love. Because it doesn't matter where you look. Any advancement that we are making within the secular world is simply rooted with this idea that they claim, the secular people, and they create experiences where it actually does seem like they are better at sharing and extending and making room for love than we are. A lot of you are not going to abandon Jane Village because of another drinking spree, as it were. Most of you are going to abandon Jane Village community precisely because you found another community that embraced you with more love. Whether that was real or pseudo, whether it was fake or not, whether that was actually love that actually frees you to be all that God created you to be, it doesn't matter, but here is the bottom line. There is all these versions or offerings of love that are competing within the world. And whereas we are stuck inside here, wrestling with our theological framings, our understandings with who we are going to accept or who we are not going to accept, with who is allowed and who is not allowed, the world figured out that we had the one great gift, which was love. So they just created pseudo versions of love. So we need almost to be a church reimagined for love. A church reimagined to be able to extend love to those in most desperate need of it. It's not a rocket science. I mean, my wife, I was going to say my friend. I mean, she's, I guess, because she's a wife, she's also a friend. But that changes from day to day, but she still remains a wife. But anyway, my wife, when she's not leading worship here in front, she serves as a chaplain in this incredible school. And they do a lot of amazing work. Anyway, so the good thing about school is like you serve students for a season and they keep going on to bigger, greater, better things, as it were. And so that happens sometimes that some of the students they were working with eventually transitioned to go to campus and they ended up in all sorts of places. But anyway, they come back sometime now this Christmas holiday to just hang out with family and whatever not. And they pop by Muthoni's office to just hear how it's going. And we all carry this anxiety. I don't know about you. We carry this anxiety about what becomes of our kid after they go to college, right? But for one of Muthoni's students, really, ends up in a city in the States called Portland. Now, Portland is known as the most secular liberal city in the entire of America. So she goes, this girl who comes from this Christian school, this school where we have done all this work, all these structured ways of discipling you and walking with you. And then she gets accepted in this incredible college in a city called Portland. And obviously, most of us who know the story would just say, please don't take your daughter to that school. She's a daughter. She just turned 18. You're sending her to the city of Portland. But not only is she in Portland, within Portland, she ends up in the most liberal, secular, small college. I mean, it's literally it's a university, I guess, comprising, I don't know what we understand with secular. Maybe it's a university comprising of, Koinange Street people, It's like, that's the best we can come up with. It's like, here, everything goes. And so you have this girl, she's young, she just come from Kenya, from a Christian school where she was being watched and cared for, and her spirituality was being attended to with intentionality. I mean, they had several chaplains for God's sake. But she ends up in Portland, in the most secular city in the States, the most secular liberal college she could be in. And so everybody is just sort of holding their life with bated breath. And she comes back over this Christmas period and she tells Wakina Muthoni, it couldn't have gone any better. My faith in Christ hasn't flourished this much since I left Roslyn College. I mean, the Roslyn school, as it were. I mean, she has made friends within this super liberal community marked with a lot of cancel culture. She has founded a small Bible study with her friends. And she first, of course, it's a miracle that she even made friends. This present, you cannot even say you're a Christian because you'll be orchestrated. God has made a way, and she has gathered a few of her friends. But the thing that has sustained her the most is simply this, which is why I'm telling you the story. It's simply this. She found a church within that community that loves her. A church within that community that loves her. Not a church that knew that some Kenyan kid was going to leave from Roslyn Academy and end up in this particular college. Not a church that even particularly works very hard to connect with those students. But no, a church possession, a church reimagined for love. So that if someone shows up within this community, the only thing they know is to love. And they have loved the girl and loved her well, I'm telling you. This girl has found her best experience of who God is within a place where she has no business experiencing God. She is thriving. Not because she is very committed to her Bible studies, not because she's very devoted to her prayer life, although all those things fit in. It's primarily because a community embraced her in love. Like literally, she was saying that when she was flying back into, like literally she has people who volunteer to pass by her college and pick her up and bring her to church, and they hang out and they worship and they do everything, and then they pick her back and they take her to college. When she's coming to Kenya for me to catch her flight, some family offers, we're going to go and drop you at the airport. My friends, it's not very complicated what I'm trying to talk about. I'm just simply saying that by and large, we are not wired, organized, curated for love. We are organized for attending church services. We are very well suited for praising God upward. We are very well prepared to, I guess, even sometimes care for those who are suffering, but by and large. And this is 3 years in of this community, so I'm not talking about out there. By and large, this loving community, as good as it is by far still very inward looking. Love is not something we experience inward. It's always something we externalize. Love is always something that costs us something. So some family offers and says, I'm going to be picking. Now, they do most of the other things well, of course. Their worship is on point. Their preaching, I would argue, it's not as good as mine, but it's somewhere, you know. So like this idea of a church reimagining for a complex world, what I'm trying to communicate with every fiber of my being is, can we be a community wired to love? Wired to love. For us to love one another inside here. For us to love the stranger who happens to walk in here. If a student like that was to walk in a community like this, would we ever even notice? I can say that emphatically, yes, even as your pastor on a personal level. Even me, who has worked with university students a lot before. So when I used to think, and when we came up with this idea with Modoni of a church, of chance on this idea of a church reimagining for a complex world, most of the times what we used to think about was this idea of structures. What would be different about our church? What could we be different about our worship? What could we do different about community engagement? What could we do? And all of churches seem to engage with the spectrum one way or another about that. And those are important because structures and liturgies end up forming and shaping who we have become. But here is what I think we most of the time lose, and where I want to lay the emphasis for us this morning is simply this. Maybe what needs most reimagining isn't the structures, isn't any of the things. What needs most reimagining is the people. And it's not about the people being reimagined, it's about the people reimagining themselves. Because remember back to Exodus when God says that dramatic thing, you guys are going to be a covenant people and a treasured possession, that you guys are going to be a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. And these guys say, of course, everything you say we are going to do, we are going to walk with you. A couple of decades, years, hundreds of years later, who knows? Finally, this is the prophet Jeremiah is on the scene. And in Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 1 to 8, it starts by, this is God saying what this relationship has become. The word of the Lord came to me saying, go and proclaim in the hearing of Jerusalem. This is rough because God says, I remember the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me in the wilderness in a land not sown. Israel was holy to the Lord, the first fruit of his harvest. All who ate of it were held guilty. Disaster came upon them. Literally meaning anyone who attacked Israelites were held guilty, and disaster came upon them because these guys were amazing in their youthful devotion, in their loving as a bride, and how they followed God in the wilderness, in a land not sown. Now hear the word of the Lord, O house of Jacob, all the families of the house of Israel. That says the Lord. What wrong did your ancestors find in me that they went far from me and went after worthless things and became worthless themselves? You just sense that tinge of betrayal from God's side. They did not say, where is the Lord? Who brought us up from the land of Egypt, who led us in the wilderness, in a land of deserts and pits, in a land of drought and deep darkness, in a land that no one passes through, where no one lives. Literally, no one asks, where is this God who did these great things? You people, I brought you into a plentiful land to eat its fruits and its good things. But when you entered it, you defiled my land and made my heritage an abomination. I mean, God is just like, what are you talking on? The priest did not say, I mean, this is direct to the pseudo priest of 21st century, at which point, because my thing just keeps going low and low and low. Don't want you attributing its falling to my powerful preaching. And I brought into a plentiful land to eat its fruit and its good things. But when you entered, you defiled my land and made my heritage an abomination. The priest did not say, where is the Lord? Those who handle the Lord did not know me. The rulers transgressed against me. The prophets prophesied by Baal and went after things that do no profit. I do hear that. Now I know for a good chunk of you who find yourself in this community, you would almost be the first ones to say that isn't very different from what the church is today. That we technically haven't changed. But what I want to highlight by sharing this story of Jeremiah and God and how he's disappointed with them is that to simply tell you this, that in the fullness of this story, in the fullness of the dream that God has for these people as their treasured possession and all those different things, what he found to be the hardest thing to move was the people. It was not the structures. It was how do we organize this nation to be a people covenanted to me? What seemed the hardest to move was to simply uproot or remove the slave mentality from the Israelites. They just never transcended that. They just never saw themselves as the freed children of God now. That every chance they got, they still went after false gods. Every chance, whatever they did with their freedom was something that moved them away from who God is. That for God, all this dream, or you'll be my treasured possession, and you'll be all these different things, fell apart because the people could not imagine themselves differently. They could not live as free people. They could not live as a people that God has claimed. They could not live as a people that God has called his own. And you read the story of Israel, the Old Testament, is this tension. And you just want to tell these guys, will you just wake up and realize that you are in a different world? That this God is actually loving, and he's not going to abandon you. That the things he did in the Red Sea and with the Pharaoh and all those different, it's not just things that he did once in a while. He did those things because he so desperately wanted to be with you. So for you and I, what does a church reimagine for a complex world look like? I think the hardest part has to be with reimagining ourselves as a people. Reimagining ourselves as a people. Now I'm using all these words and I don't even know how they land and where they look like. But very few of us sit in this church without having some form of church formation that they are bringing to this space. Most of you, I mean, a good chunk of you are from ICC Nairobi. It has its own formational process. And I'm not saying any of those things are bad. I'm just simply saying that every single one of us sits here with some background of what a church is. Now, what I've found to be true, especially for a small church like ours, with our formation, is working extra hard to not be those people from where we left with, and some ways to avoid whatever was broken about the systems and whatever not it was. But by and large, that wanting to separate ourselves from that world almost reduces us to being inept participants in the story that God has for us. So maybe you're here and you came from a church where giving was abused, where there was always a longer sermon for you to give than actual giving itself. You show up into this community and you're happy for most of the things, but the one area you're not going to engage in is giving. Because every time you go to giving, you feel like, oh, they're taking us back to where we came from. And so you come from a church where maybe you went through a need and no one saw you, no one was present to you. So then you show up into this community and you say, church people, this is never there for you. So there's a covenant you made by yourselves that I'm almost never going to show up also. Or at the very least, I'm never going to let them see me for who I am in this space. All of us come with all multitude of formations. And for the past 3 years, I think by and large, we have lived based on those formations. And those are important. I'm just trying to simply say that there is still work to be done to say, wait a minute, am I actually open to what God is doing here and now? Or am I perpetually trying to recreate and run away and avoid what was broken from where I've come from? Or am I actually trying to recreate where I came from because where I came from was so wonderful? So you're always grumpy that the pastor doesn't show up in a suit. He's grumpy at the jokes he tells. Like, oh God, when is he going to be sick? Anyway, when he doesn't come, he's there, especially that one. Oh God, someone talk to the guy. Can someone buy a comb for him already? Like, can you just talk about your family? Focus on the word of, the people. Like, hey. So the idea is we come here as a found people. And so when I use the word reimagination, it's like this invitation to say, can you pry open a little bit? Open yourself up, look inward and see, where were you hurt that stands in the way of you giving yourself fully to what God is doing in this season? Where were you really encouraged and so you keep holding out for the church to finally do that? I mean, a lot of you have problems with the song we sing. When are they going to sing simple songs? I'm like, why are we such maverick city people? Like, kukuwa tu na American mingi. Like, you don't even notice that we sing Liseme, Bwana ni mchungaji wetu. You're like, what was that one they sang? Gratitude? Who sang that? Anyway, I'm not dissing you. I'm just saying it's natural world. But I'm just trying to invite you to say, can we reimagine ourselves and say, we're in a new space. Let's so. Now, at this point, if you have been coming here for a bit while, if you actually have made the way here, I mean, chances are, you are seeing the lowest, this church at, I guess, its lowest, whatever property way. So you're not going to go anywhere because you could have gone to a place where at least they have tiles to step on with your shoes, you know? So here's what I mean when I try to encourage us to imagine ourselves. Forget the systems, forget the structures, I'm not overly keen in doing all that. I'm interested in us being a community who stand for something, who actually look for someone outward ourselves. And this is what I mean when I say that. I'm simply trying to invite us to reimagine ourselves as lavishly loving, engaged participants and generous presence. Reimagining ourselves as lavishly loving, engaged participants, and with a generous presence. So what I mean by all of those many big words, I simply mean this. Lavishly loving. I don't know where we lost this one, but it's Paul who said this as black and white as he could. That if I speak in the tongues of human and of angels and do not have love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. I guess we responded say, I'm not even speaking with these tongues and human angels. Me, I'm just speaking English. Not even to worry about being a noisy, clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, which I wouldn't mind, especially at this time, please give away your possession. And if I had over my body, don't bring your body. And if I had over my body so that I may boast but do not have love, I gain nothing. Isn't it so weird that church is equally not known for its love? Like, what else would we be looking for? What else are we doing? Could it be that God looks down on us and just says, even if you worship as best as you know with the best of instruments but do not have love, you are just a noisy gong. But here's the challenge with love, because all of us interpret this in our own different way. I come back to this idea. Love is always externalized. It's always externalized. Sure, you do the work so that you're loving well, but most of the time, it's always experienced in the neighbor, not in yourself. But here we are, and as a church, we almost have to start by saying, could you at least love your spouse? Could you at least love your partner well? Could you at least love the people you are around you very well? If you showed up here to workplace, could we say that you are defined and marked by love? It's not some thoughts that we have. It's not some ideas we have. It's actually lived experience. If you worked with a client yesterday, would that client respond and say, that's one loving person? So here at the site, we had some problems. Some things were stolen and whatever. The thing is, we ended up saying it must be this particular guy who was a caretaker because his story was not straight and he was not coming out. So anyway, we take him to the cop station, hoping that he is going to actually tell the truth and just say, Sawa, let's work this out. Guy goes, I guess he's very vulgar to even the cops and everything else. And before we know it, we're thinking he's at the police station. The guy has been taken to court and has been remanded to some place. And so he's in remand. Okay. So, very quickly he becomes very saved and he's calling me as a pastor and saying, send me some money for whatever things, and whatever. It's like just going like, dude, it's your problem. Why is it our problem? Just figure yourself out. And as we talk, and his brother also works at the site, and so we talk to the brother and we say, your guy is in the remand. Almost can you as a family take over? We actually took him because he did not do his work very well, that we are paying him quite well about. And so he was at the remand, and then we talked to the brother, and that things were not seemingly moving forward. And the Kenyan court system, you can literally get lost in that system forever. So I guess at some point we were like, okay, let's just see what we can do for this guy. And this is not a prop to me, this is a prop more to Sam who isn't here. So literally Sam has to now go to the arresting corp and find out our guy. We thought itakuwa tu hapa, asking him some questions. How did he end up in this remand place? And blah, blah, blah. And this guy says, now we have to wait for him to come to court. And the next court hearing date is such and such a date, sometime in December. And it's fine. And so eventually it does end up that this is going to cost some money to get him out. And I'm telling Sam, why is it costing us money? Why is his family? So we talk to the brother, and brother says, man, I'm like everything. I'm like the only one with an income, blah, blah, blah. Long story short. And so we're like, I'm not kidding you. I was just telling Sam, I guess we should just forget him. And Sam is like, it's not like so much money. I'm like, it's money in 2023, So Sam just ends up saying, okay, it's okay, I'll go see what it's about. And so this whole thing ends up being such a long process, and it costs Sam several number of days. He has to see the prosecutor, he has to see that, and then he has to show up in court several times because whatever the whole disparity is. And finally, he shows up in court, and this is the day. And because of some corruption thing with the prosecutor, whatever, Sam's file, our guy's file, conveniently gets lost at the peak of the moment. So Sam has been in the court. He just came from seeing the prosecutor a few minutes ago. So of course, he sits there and all these other court cases are released, and eventually in the courtroom is literally Sam, the prosecutor, some cop, and the judge. And the judge is actually upping and going because that was the work for today. And literally Sam has to say, hey, excuse me, Your Honor. And he's like, my case was supposed to be. And he's like, what do you mean your case? Blah, 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 blah. And so eventually, the file has to go and be fetched and what have you. Finally, our guy is released and and I'm like looking at Sam and going like, at what point does this guy pay? At what point does this guy pay? And so Sam is like, okay, whatever. Anyway, basically, he came out and eventually, and you'll be happy to know, the guy showed up at the site and demanded that we pay him his arrears somewhere. At which point I wanted to tell Sam, see, wasted love. But the bottom line I'm trying to say is that even as we were building this church, we were at least intentionally serious to say it's just not a place where we're going to be working like every other site where these guys are. We want to try our best to see these guys. And that has come at quite a price. So basically I'm trying to say love costs. Love costs. So the simple question I want to ask you that is, who are you loving in a costly way? In a way that is actually costing you. Who are you loving in a way that is actually costing you? Beyond yourself. It cannot be something we think about. It has to be something we are actually playing a role in. Also, there's this idea of engaged participant. You can tell I don't have a lot of time to go deeply into all of this, but engaged participant is almost defined by this former president of the States, Theodore Roosevelt. Yeah, I'm like Kikuyu. And I just came back from Shag, so I'm catching up with my English, So Theodore is reported to have said that it's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how strong the man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who are the best, knows in the air the triumph of high achievement, and who are the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither knew victory or defeat. Engaged participant. And you know how much of a big deal this is in a community like this. I mean, maybe most of the work I do is just to get people engaged. It's like I don't have a corner plot that I'm waiting to unveil, as soon as we are enough within this community. I have like prophetic powers that I'm waiting to start doing as soon as we are enough of us, or whatever it is. This is it. Trust you me. It's been 3 years. I have tried my best to be a better pastor. I'm like, this happened, Nico. So I'm trying to simply say, can we be engaged with this so at least we can move all of us to be better, as it were. Engage, participate. And then this final one, generous presence. Generous presence. It's Eugene Peterson, that famed theologian pastor, who defined discipleship simply as a long obedience in the same direction. That's all I'm trying to say, a long obedience in the same direction. When I was hanging out with another good friend of mine this week, and they said they went to this place to be mentored in this cohort and everything else. And so I was asking, how was it? And of the many words she could have used, she simply say, she bumped into the most generous lady leaders within the tech industry she could ever bump into. And what struck me was that idea of generous. These ladies were just generous. And I've been thinking about how much generosity has to do with how we experience life. A lot of us are present sometimes, but whether or not we are generous presence is a whole different thing. And especially church circles, because we almost interpret generosity in one or two ways. One is to serve in a particular ministry, or two, to give money in it. Most of the times we show up shut up. This is not a place where we show up with our most generous versions of ourselves. We show up to sing and to worship the Lord. We show up to listen to the pastor, especially when it's someone's shorter. We show up basically to participate upward this way. But as soon as this is over, we all shrink into a place. That's not a diss on the introverts amongst us. I'm just simply saying we don't just show up with generosity. We don't show up to check in on one another. How much does it cost to just walk up to that person? I think you're new here. How are you? And of course, even the person who hears that just simply is closes down. I'm fine. Don't ask me. These church people, they always want things from you. So here I want to give almost permission to say, we are not wanting anything from one another. But before we talk about them, let's talk about ourselves. Are we showing up with generous presence? When you are thinking about coming to church today, how much of it was informed with frontward facing vis-a-vis around the circle, around the coffee? We have all these amazing stories. Every time I'm standing here looking at all of you, I'm like, your stories are just amazing. Marvels and marvels and marvels. I want to have a cup of coffees with all of you and just sit across the table. But I'm like, we get together every Sunday, and no one gets to have their story heard in any meaningful way. So we come and we go. The people, and I cannot kid you, the people for whom this church makes the most sense are not necessarily the people who are always front-facing this way. It's the guys who are the last ones to leave this place. And it always happens. Even when it rains, we're just saying now we have become those people. I am going home at 4 p.m. Because these guys here, by 4 p.m., some of you have napped, have woken up, have gone to the next agenda of the day. Wako kanisani bado. But it's because for whatever reason we have embraced this idea that church cannot be at its most essential front-facing. It has to be across one another, around one another, having tea together. Now, again, even if you're the most introverted person, I'm not telling you to be extroverted. I'm just simply saying you can reach out to someone. You can show up with an openness of spirit. Otherwise, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? All of you have come from churches. You think we are going to top that worship that you had in that amazing, great church? Maybe it will be less loud. You think a guy like me is going to preach as great, powerful sermons as the ones that are all over YouTube and the ones that you guys listen to on podcast? That bites me a little bit because I want to be that person that you guys are listening to. But here's what I'm trying to invite us to, and I don't know where now we are. So Eugene Peterson simply says this. This idea of long obedience in the same direction. It says, and yet I decide every day to set aside what I can do best and attempt to do what I do very clumsily. None of us are experts at this. Trust you me. I received the correct. They laid a hand on me, and I'm always in a mini panicky mood when the service is over. Because someone will just walk up to me and I'm like just crawling inside. I am not an expert at this. I know I pretend. I open myself to the frustrations and failures of loving. Daring to believe that failing in love is better than succeeding in pride. My dear brothers and sisters, I'm simply inviting you for us to try to fail in love and to succeed in pride. Otherwise, with a church that is this size, it soon enough will be filled whatever with every seat covered. And it's just going to be just one more bigger church where no one knows anyone. Where the greatest commitment is going to be whether you showed up for church or not. Whether you gave up your 10% or not. That's important to run this thing, but at the heart of it, you are going to be the same person without any transformation. So I know I've said quite a bit today, but what I really wanted to pass on to as we move into this phase is to do our best effort to reimagine ourselves. That's called transformation. That's called repentance, rethinking our ways. Are there ways that you need to rethink of you? To be more loving here, to be more generous, to be a more generous presence here, to be someone who is actively engaged. Not just someone who attends the service. It gets boring, I promise you. But to be someone who actively engages. But that's not someone of your neighbor. It's all of us. That's a frustrating thing that it counts all of us in. Because if I show up and I'm ready to engage and all of us show up and we are shrouded and covered, you look like a weirdo. I'm like, dude, don't you know which church you're in? Here we are contemplative. This is this close to being Catholics. It's like, hey, hi, how are you? So, all of these things, it's possible. It can be done. I am sticking every fiber of my being in making this possible. If finally you miss out on my life and I come to the end of the day and you cannot measure me against that idea, that we became a community where people are lavishly loving one another, where people were engaged participants, where people are generous presence. Trust you me, all our sermons, our worship, our Bible readings, all the other things I'm going to continually challenge you on, who have come to nothing. Who have come to nothing. And we can only do that because of what Christ has done for us on the cross. He was the first lavishly loving person, God, on our side. So lavishly loving that he ends up hanging on the cross. Jesus remained the most engaged participant, lead the Gospels. No questions was too shallow. No person was too far gone to not be engaged with. Nothing. He engaged with everyone, including inviting Judas, who's going to actually crucify him, in the innermost circle and also entrust him with the money. And this guy was like risking everything to save everyone. This guy can best be defined by his generous presence. We still talk about him because of how he lived his life, so otherworldly that we didn't know what to do with him. But the epitome of that is him on the cross. And when he shows up on the cross, he simply says, I am just going to be someone who gets broken, whose blood gets to be poured out so that you all can live an abundant life. Another word for all those many English words is I'm inviting you to an abundant life in this community. So I invite the worship team back up. I want to also invite you to the Lord's table. We have two stations, one on that side and another one on this side. And because we are in this space, we are trying to encourage almost people like this idea of coming up this way to the front as we get wires. So I know it's a bit of a walk from Bedside Park and we had something at the back, so bear with us. But again, the Lord's table, it's open and welcome to every single one of us in this place. So do please come to the Lord's table. Just come, pick some piece of bread, some grape juice, go sit down with them. And at the end of this worship song, we are going to come together and celebrate the Lord's table together.